units into country B's currency units. So this would be how many Vietnamese dong do you have to pay for $1? It would be something like 25,000 these days, I guess. Now, if you reshuffle that, then this gives you PTA times EABT divided by PTB times YTA times YTB divided by YTB. Now, you know this fellow here. This is the real exchange rate, right? This is QABT. So under which circumstances does this ratio coincide with that ratio? Question mark. Exactly. This is YTA over YTB if and only if QAT QABT equals 1. That is, if absolute PPP holds. So this is fancy, right? It's if and only if. Right, this has to be 1. So if absolute purchasing power parity holds, then using the market exchange rate to translate country A currency units into currency B units gives you an accurate idea of relative income levels. Now, this is in fact what the IMF does, or no, what the World Bank does when it provides you with data on GDP per capita or GDP in current US dollars. It just uses the market exchange rate. So you take the GDP of Vietnam in 2020, you multiply by the nominal exchange rate, or actually here you divide it because it's foreign currency units divided by domestic currency units. And then you get this number. Now, the problem is we cannot take this for granted, right? So we cannot take for granted that the real exchange rate equals 1. Okay. Now, this brings us to the next thing. Stay where you are. An economist you know, that's the next point, B, an economist you know argues that the procedure described in part A tends to systematically underrate your poor country's real GDP. Do you agree?
Yes.
Okay. And why is that?
Because of the price of the non-traded goods.
Yes.
So in rich countries, because of the higher wages in the traded sector, so that translated to the overprice for the non-traded item, relatively compared to those in poor countries.
Yep.
So that means the poor countries are being underrated.
Yes. So let me express that in words. So problem QABT tends to be greater than 1 if YAT is greater than YTB. And that's exactly Balassa-Samuelson. So what Balassa-Samuelson says is that this is not equal to 1. In fact, there's a tendency for this to be greater than 1. Or put differently, if this is the price of the Big Mac in the rich country currency, this is the price of the Big Mac in the poor country currency, and you translate both into the same currency, then it's very likely that this is greater than that. Okay, so, well, that means that, let me give you an example. Suppose that QABT is 1 plus phi YTA plus YTB. Let's make it a linear function, right? So the real exchange rate increases in income discrepancies. This is the rich country, and this is the poor country. Then PTA YTA times EABT divided by PTB YTB is 1 plus phi YTA over YTB times YTA over YTB, which is just YTA over YTB plus phi YTA over YTB squared. So this is what you want to see, what you want to show. This is what you're interested in. You want to know, is real GDP in amount produced, value added produced in country A greater than country B? So what's the relationship? Now, what this example shows you, and of course, this specification is just something I pulled out of my pocket, right? But if there's a positive relationship between the real exchange rate and this ratio, then this means if you look at this, you will get this plus something on top. This is greater than YTA over YTB. So you're essentially exaggerating income differences. So country A may be richer than country B, but this equation makes it look even more, that makes the income discrepancies even bigger. So there's no doubt about United States being a richer country than Ethiopia. But if you use the market exchange rate naively, then you exaggerate the actual income difference. You make Ethiopia look poorer, and you make the United States look richer. Okay, now what is the solution? How do you solve this problem, and how can policy institutions? Suppose this is one of the key questions in economics. Economic growth, right? Which countries are rich and which countries are poor? And now we are really at the data issue. We want to know which are the poor countries, which are the rich countries. And what this thing tells us is that we are naive, and we just use market exchange rates to translate national currency GDP data into the same currency, then we can make huge mistakes. So the question is, how do we solve that? And there's a very simple solution in theory, which, however, is very hard to implement in practice, but it can be done. Exactly. The bottom line is the following. When we do not use the market exchange rate, but we use the purchasing power parity, then see what happens. Took me a long time to really understand that, and I think a lot of people haven't understood it. So that's why I make such a fuss about that. Now suppose you have this data and that data, right? So this is in local currency units A, and this is in local currency units B. And you multiply not by the market exchange rate, but you multiply by the the purchasing power parity, which is LCU B, LCU A. Right? Now, what is the purchasing power parity? How do we compute purchasing power parities? Well, the purchasing power parity is computed by dividing PTB by PTA. Now, if you do that, then you have equals PTA YTA divided by PTB YTB times PTB PTA. And guess what? This cancels out, that cancels out, and you get YTA over YTB. So this is the point of using purchasing power parities. Purchasing power parities, and note, this is not, when we talk about purchasing power parity, I mentioned this this morning, sometimes we talk about the theory of purchasing power parity, but here we talk about exchange rates. And these exchange rates are based on this calculation. Now, if we do that, if we use the right exchange rate to translate this thing into local currency unit B units, then this gives us an accurate idea about relative income levels. Okay? Now, computing those purchasing power parities is a huge project, right? And it's when you get into that, it's getting, the more you think about it, the more interesting it gets. It's easy to compute purchasing power parities for the Big Mac, but the Big Mac is not the only thing that we consume. And so, so what do you do when you, and there's different approaches of doing it. One approach is the so-called Geary-Kaymis method. The other one is the EKS method. There's all kinds of methods to compute those purchasing power parities. By the end of the day, when you really want to have an idea about a country's relative income position, then don't use current US dollar, but use so-called international dollar or PPP adjusted data. That's what Hui was asking this morning, right? The PPP adjusted gives you an accurate idea. Now, of course, what you all still have to do is you have to get rid of inflation, but that's not an issue when you look at one point in time and comparing countries, because then basically, let me put it bluntly, the same inflation rate is in all numbers. Now, did anyone succeed in doing this? No, I did. So let me show you what I did. So I downloaded, look, this is what you get when you download this data. Now I have all the German stuff in here, right? So you have Afghanistan, and the important thing is, and the world, oops, that's not what I wanted. I wanted just to make this broader. Nope, I didn't want to have that. So anyway, so let me go back. And let me make this smaller. So we have for Afghanistan, we have GDP PPP, we have GDP current US dollar. When we talk about PPP, we talk about current international dollars. The international dollars is something that you cannot touch, right? It's an artificial magnitude that is used to how can I say that? To signal that we're talking about PPP adjusted data. Good. Okay. So then you have GDP, you have population. Now what I did is I filtered, right? I said I want to have that first. Then I copied and pasted it here. So this is now for all countries just current US dollars. I did the same thing for PPP adjusted dollars, and it did the same thing for population. And then finally, I computed for all countries in my sample, these are the World Bank country codes, I computed GDP per capita US dollar relative to the population by dividing by the population. I did the same thing for the GDP per capita PPP. And you see that, for example, Afghanistan, if you do the PPP adjustment, the GDP per capita is 5 times as large. That doesn't make Afghanistan a rich country, but it shows that Afghanistan is not as poor as the market exchange rate makes it look. Now let's go down to Vietnam, because that's of interest. So Vietnam, if you translate the Vietnamese dong figures into US dollars, then you get a per capita GDP per year of $3,534 dollars. When you do the PPP adjustment, you get something that's roughly 3 times as high, 11,609. What is the intuitive reason? The intuitive reason is this figure suggests that Vietnamese people go shopping in New York City, which they don't. Vietnamese people go shopping in Hanoi, they go shopping in Ho Chi Minh City, and they go shopping in Binh Cát, right? And so in Binh Cát, you pay other prices than, so if you buy a mango in Binh Cát, sorry for mispronouncing it, you pay a lower price than when you paid on Fifth Avenue in New York City. And so that has to be adjusted. Now, the last thing I did, I produced that scatter plot. And this scatter plot is, I think, super instructive. Now, the thing so you have GDP in current US dollars on the horizontal axis. You have GDP in current international dollars on the vertical axis. In fact, this is per capita. Sorry about omitting that. And this is the 45-degree line. And you see that all those countries in the lower range of the international income distribution, they move above the 45-degree line, right? This is like a concave thing, right? We can check which this country is, and my guess, this is Switzerland. I'm not sure, but I was already also interested in what that country was. Now, this is a country where the PPP adjustment actually increases the GDP. But by and large, we see that rich countries move below the 45-degree line and poor countries move above. Right? And that's important to know, and it's important to understand that the PPP adjustment gives justice to the fact that Balassa-Samuelson effects give rise to real exchange rates of poor countries being greater than 1. And so the number in current US dollars is just too low. You have to adjust for the fact that there are price differences. Okay, now let's check what that country is, and let's check what this country is. And then finally, let's check what the highest country is. I have some ideas. Okay, so let me... so here you have the ratio, right? And you have some countries where Afghanistan, if you do the PPP adjustment, then you get 5 times as much, right? Doesn't make Afghanistan a rich country, but it corrects a little bit of that. Now let me go to this, and let me check what country that could be. Nope. Let me do that again. Right. So I'm checking. I want to know what that country is. It's somewhere it has current US dollars. It must have GDP in current international dollars above 100,000. That's probably the better way of approaching it. It's Singapore. Now Singapore, interestingly, the PPP correction, instead of lowering, it's a rich country without any doubt, and apparently doing the PPP correction raises GDP. Now, my interpretation is that Singapore is a country where things are relatively cheap. So if you travel to Norway, stuff is super expensive. If you travel to Switzerland, stuff is super expensive. If you travel to Singapore, apparently stuff is not very expensive. Why might that be? Well, because Singapore is close to Malaysia, Singapore is close to China, so there's a lot of competition, right? There's so probably there's a lot of things that keep prices somehow in check. Now let me give you another example. Let me look at. So here you have a country where the PPP adjustment does almost nothing to GDP. It's actually the country with the highest So does anybody know this country? It's called Luxembourg or Luxembourg. Does anybody know where Luxembourg is? No. So let me okay. Let me show you. So Luxembourg is a tiny country in the heart of Europe. It's really tiny, right? Probably Luxembourg is smaller than Ho Chi Minh City. Not probably, but for sure, right? You can cross it on a bicycle in 2 hours, which probably would be very difficult in Ho Chi Minh City. So Luxembourg is this tiny thing here. It's neighboring Belgium, France, and Germany. And by the way, this is Mainz, this is Frankfurt, right? So going from Mainz to Luxembourg is very easy. Now, Luxembourg is part of the European Union. Now, why do you think is the price level not very high in Luxembourg? Although Luxembourg is a super rich country. I mean, this is where a lot of people earn a lot of money in the financial industry. So why do you think, what keeps the price level in Luxembourg in check? Exactly. So where do the people live who work in Luxembourg? They work in Trier. Trier is a German city, right? So there's a lot of commuting between Luxembourg. So price in Luxembourg cannot be very high because people just will buy their stuff elsewhere, including the services. I mean, would you ever go get a haircut in Luxembourg? If that was very expensive, no, you go to Trier, right? And so we have this is an interesting observation, right? We don't have that the PPP the price level in Luxembourg is not very high, although this is a very rich country. So Balassa Samuelson, there's essentially no non-traded goods, to put it this way. Because people can, every service that you can get in Luxembourg, you can also buy in France or in Belgium or in Germany. And that's what people actually do. And so people who offer services, then it's also that people come in and produce the services from abroad, right? So it's people living, so it's a very special situation. Now let's look at Switzerland finally. So this is, by the way, this is also gives you an idea of a little bit of the German map, right? This is Germany. This is Luxembourg, and Mainz is here. Okay, just in case. And Frankfurt is there. If you ever wondered where Frankfurt was in Germany, it's kind of in that part. Anyway, so let's look at the data set and let's look at let's check. Let's check what we can say about Switzerland. Switzerland has the country code CHE. Yes. So Switzerland, when you look at Switzerland, you see that when you do the PPP correction, then Swiss GDP per capita, which is still super high, goes down. That reflects the fact that stuff is super expensive in Switzerland, right? So Swiss people do not buy their stuff on Fifth Avenue, they buy their stuff in Zurich, and where it's super expensive, right? I can tell you. Or in Bern, or in Basel, or in one of these Swiss cities. So the PPP adjustment pulls down Swiss GDP a little bit, not dramatically so. For Vietnam, it pushes it up, accounting for the fact that the price level in Vietnam is lower. And the International Comparison Project computes those PPPs. That's what they do, right? And they've been doing this for decades now. And they were hosted at the University of Pennsylvania. That's why it's called the Penn Effect. And now currently they're hosted at the University of Groningen. Groningen again, right? So there's a lot of things going on in Groningen. So that's super interesting. And as I said, if you go into the details of how to compute purchasing power parities, it's like you think, wow, that's not just, it's not, as we say in Germany, it's not just bean counting. It's more than that. You need to do a lot of conceptual things. And there's one person who actually got a Nobel Prize for a lot of things, Angus Deaton, who is very knowledgeable about that. He contributed a lot to this stuff. Okay, so let me go into the last. I'm really excited about that because I think it's really, it shapes our picture of the world. So finally, the British magazine The Economist offers data on prices of the McDonald's Big Mac, observed nominal exchange rates, and calculated purchasing power parities. Access to the data is given here, right? You can go to the website. Let's check whether it works. I think it does. Today the internet is very good. Yeah, the Big Mac index. Our Big Mac index shows how burger prices differ across borders. And now here you get all these things, right? And then you get the raw index and you get the GDP adjusted index. So you can play around with that, and that's nice. I have an Economist subscription, but I think to get this, you don't need an Economist subscription. Good, okay, so now let's go back to the problem set. Explain why The Economist argues that the Peruvian sol, PEN, was undervalued by 22% against the US dollar in January 2025. Does anybody want to give it a try? This is an easy one. That's very small. Let me make it bigger. Here it's a bit bigger. And
Because for Peru, right,
yeah.
it's exchanging 3.73,
Yep.
which is higher than the PPP.
Yep.
The PPP we can compute using we take the 16.9.
Mm-hmm.
You divide it by the base for US up there.
Exactly. Let me do that. Just you tell me what to do. So EPPP T Peruvian pesos divided by US dollars are done by dividing the price of the Big Mac Peru in PN by the price of the Big Mac USA in US dollars. And that's just, what was it? It was 6.9 divided by 5.79. And what you get is 2.92. Now, if you divide EPPP by E, then you get 2.92 divided by 3.73